Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our Friday panel on fake YouTube channels pushing separation and annexation. But first, preparing for permanent daylight time.
Let's see how people are after they've lived it through this winter, because again, as I say, no one's shy of telling me what their opinion is, and so I'm sure we'll get a gauge on whether or not people think that we've made a mistake.
With the tabling of new legislation, the Alberta government has begun the process of ending twice yearly changes to the clocks and locking on permanent daylight saving time. So, what will the road forward look like to reaching that point? Let's find out from the person who led the way in Yukon's transition. Andrew Smith is Intergovernmental Relations Officer with the Yukon government. Mr. Smith, pleasure to meet you, sir. Welcome to Alberta Primetime.
Thanks for having me. Excited to discuss it.
Okay, so Yukon made the change to its own permanent time zone starting back in late 2020. The first jurisdiction to do so in a very long time. What motivated the move?
Well, it had been a long-standing conversation. I think Alberta's had a long-standing conversation, as it has BC and as has Yukon, about whether this is something that's worthwhile doing anymore. And in late 2019, the then Premier of BC and Yukon had a conversation, and they talked about, hey, I think we're ready and we're moving on some legislative stuff. So why don't we go together, since we're already in that shared longitude, and try and keep things in sync. Now, things didn't quite work out the way we thought they were. Things got complicated in early 2020, if you'll recall, but Yukon made its regulatory change. BC made their legislation but didn't enact it until this year, and it was something that overwhelmingly Yukoners were interested in going on to one-time year-round, so we wanted to follow that as well. And
you became, I guess, something of the quarterback here. So what were you tasked with in leading the charge?
Yeah, I mean, there was the public-facing stuff, to make sure we got that public engagement sorted, and it turned out to be our greatest number of public engagement that Yukon had seen up to that point. And then there was a question of the regulatory, what we had to do within our own regulations to change our time zone and make sure we had the legal authority to do so. And then working with industry, working with whoever governs time, finding out who governs time, and making sure that they know what Yukon had decided, and making sure that all that stuff was rolled out to be smooth for Yukoners and businesses.
And so much of that, I have to think, revolves around technology. What hurdles then might Albertans need to be looking out for?
Yeah, I think maybe Alberta and other jurisdictions are lucky that Yukon's done this in recent history with, in a highly technologized world. So we've gone through some of the things to understand about what has to happen. And, it's, for consumers and for individuals, it's telecom networks, making sure that they know what time it is, that people primarily get the time off the phone or things that are connected to the internet. So making sure that those things are all locked in. Yukon had only a couple of complications in its industries, in particular that's airlines. So airline schedules then had to adjust between Alberta and BC depending on the year, but Alberta will have a much more diverse set of industries and connections that require time to be tracked. So think electricity, transmission, trains, pipelines, things that cross borders into time zones that now have new relationships between each other.
What about coordination, collaboration, even between different orders of government? What's a must in that regard?
Well, because of the way it rolled out for Yukon, and we were so small and we were going at it on our own, that collaboration with BC existed until it didn't, because other priorities took hold. So I think what you want to be doing, and you're in a lucky position, because if you're aligning this project in time with BC and now NWT coming along with you folks, you're in a real advantage, because you're going to have millions and millions of people and hundreds of thousands of businesses that are going to have the right time and have things sorted out correctly. So because these things are happening at the same time, you're going to have probably an easier time. And another advantage I think you would have is that telecoms and internet service providers and major companies who have control in time, they exist as businesses within your province. And they'll have a need to do that and be in their self-interest to do it. Whereas in Yukon, we had to do a lot of outreach to make sure people understood what was going on.
Understandable. Now, a moment ago, you mentioned regulations. Are there regulatory changes that should be considered?
Yeah, the only regulation we had to change was in our Interpretation Act. So the Yukon Act allows the Yukon being in control of his time zone, and then our Interpretation Act has a section on what time it is, and so we changed the regulation within there. Nothing else came up in regulatory. I did read through what Alberta is proposing, and you've got much more depth in that on that this is prescribed and that who is and is not under what circumstances allowed to use something other than official time. So I think you've gone a bit further down the distance, whereas ours just says UTC -7 year round. That's pretty much the end of the regulation for us.
We're getting the sense that businesses here are weighing what the impact might be. How do you feel the business community needs to fit into this equation? How soon should businesses be engaging in that prep?
Well, I think you should be making yourselves aware of it right now. The lesson I learned when Yukon did it, and from these sort of time zone databases that exist, is that they like to have 1 year notice before a major change like this happens. You guys are deeply within that 1 year timeline right now, so there might be a bit of pushback to get these things done in a coordinated and timely way with those external agencies and databases. But it's not something that should be you should be forgetting about too soon. Especially there will be hangover effects. Like if you book a calendar appointment right now for after November 2026, it's going to think that it's still in that time zone. So it'll take time for things to straighten out after that. There's complications that may or may not be able to be helped through technology, and so you got to be planning ahead and thinking about it.
Yeah, there really are some considerations there that we need to be keeping in mind. So I have to ask, in large part, has all gone well with the Yukon experience? Would you label it a success more than 5 years in?
I think the delivery of it, yeah, a success. I mean, certainly for something that hadn't been done and that there was no real guidebook for. Fortunately, I've kind of written a bunch of that stuff down and been able to share it with Alberta, BC, and NWT, so it should be a bit easier for them on that process stuff. We had a couple hiccups with some companies just not knowing that this had happened, and I think that's just a matter of exposure. With Alberta and BC doing these things at the same time, if that's the way it goes, you've got a lot better chance of things going smoothly because there's going to be more attention paid for it. And yeah, I think Yukoners are very satisfied with not having to change the clock. And it's been 6 years of that, and watching other people have frustrations across Canada and getting calls like this, examining what the impacts are.
Indeed. Sir, we really appreciate getting your perspective on this. Thank you kindly, Mr. Smith.
Thanks for having me.
Andrew Smith is Intergovernmental Relations Officer with the Yukon government. From moving to permanent daylight time to outside influence on the separation debate, aiming for smoke-free future generations and honoring a quarter century of quiet generosity. Our Primetime This Week panel is in, and joining us this evening, Carissa Halton, author, speaker, consultant, and facilitator, and Darren Krause, editor and founder of LiveWire Calgary. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with one of the dominant discussions of the week, that being the Smith government tabling legislation to put Alberta on permanent daylight time, aligning with BC's recent move to the same and putting the province on the schedule Yukon has embraced since 2020. Carissa, we heard from the government official off the top who guided Yukon's shift away from the seasonal time change a few years back. What do you see lying ahead for the Alberta government in embarking on such a process, and is it one Albertans are ready for?
Oh man, I mean, I think that this has been a conversation for many years. I know when I was in the Premier's office, we were getting all sorts of correspondence on it, and it was explored. I think now that we are further ahead and lots of other jurisdictions have done it or are exploring it, obviously it's a reasonable thing to explore. I don't know if we are ready, though, for daylight time, or they're choosing standard time. What are they choosing, standard or daylight? The problem for me is that I've never been able to keep track of which is which. And so I think that this conversation is a difficult one for some Albertans, if you're like me, who've never really been sure of which is which when we're in the moment. I think that a better conversation would be had if we were talking about when daylight was. So, do we want daylight in the morning when we're walking the dog, when our kids are going to school in the winter? Or not. And so I think that in some ways the terminology that we use for our time zones offers a bit of a challenge when it comes to actually talking to citizens about this.
Darren, we also had Dr. Michael Andel on the program this week. He's a professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of Calgary. He gave lots of rationale for why adopting standard time would be a better bet. How engaged do you think Albertans are at this point? Do we care whether it's daylight or standard?
Well, you know what? I think it is a topic of conversation. It's a great water cooler piece. But I think for me, if it is daylight saving time, all throughout the year, one of the concerns that I would have is 9:30 a.m. is when the sun rises in the morning. But in reality, while it's a good talker, I don't know that Albertans are really, really dialed into this. I actually think, given some of the considerations we have around healthcare and the economy, affordability, I think those are the things. And Mayor Jeremy Farkas here in Calgary said, he didn't even want to comment on it because he thought that there were bigger fish to fry in the political arena.
Carissa, what's to be made of the Premier suggesting Albertans should try year-round daylight time for 1 year, maybe before deciding whether or not we like it, and maybe putting it to a vote?
I mean, for one, it makes it sound like it's a really easy thing to do, to just shift, well, we'll try daylight on, we'll try standard. And I think we heard from Mr. Smith from the Yukon that there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of different elements that need to be set in motion and in order to do this right. And so I think she's suggesting something that sounds pretty impossible to actually logistically do. And I think that that's a bit unfair for the whole process.
Well, and speaking of voting, Darren, going ahead with permanent daylight time means ignoring the outcome of a 2021 referendum on time change, with the government now preparing to spend millions on a 9-question or maybe more referendum in October. How likely is this time change decision to cast uncertainty over that future process?
Well, I'm not sure, because I don't think that any of the referendum questions, perhaps the constitutional ones will be binding, but really, I think any time the province goes out and does polling on these types of things, which is really what it is when you have a referendum, that's what it amounts to, is a widespread polling. And, the case of giving it a year, I think, we just want to find out what the opportunity is here come election time in 2027. So I don't know that it has any impact on the referendum process, because it's either a will we or won't we at the end of the day anyways.
All right, next up for us, concerns being raised over fake YouTube channels targeting the separation debate. A new report from Canadian Digital Media Research identifies about 20 YouTube channels posing as Albertans pushing separation and annexation by the U.S., using the same scripts, clips, even posting at the same time, together reaching nearly 40 million views.
This is a very important year in Alberta, with the idea of a provincial referendum on the ballot being potentially held in the fall. It's important for Albertans and Canadians broadly to know which voices are real and which are fake.
The videos often use real news about Alberta separation, but distort and exaggerate the grievances, sometimes getting the facts wrong.
Anybody promoting, U.S. annexation or U.S. statehood, they're not part of our movement.
Says it's reviewing the channels and will remove content violating. Some still worry about outside influences.
There are players, I think, that are taking advantage of chaos, amping it up in order to manipulate voting.
Alberta's Justice Minister says people making AI deepfakes will be targeted by new legislation, and it will require cooperation from other areas.
The Minister of Public Safety, through the work with municipal, provincial and federal agencies like the RCMP, like the local policing detachments, are very much live to this issue, and they're working diligently to address it as well.
The minister says anything breaking Alberta's election rules is under provincial jurisdiction. Darren, what does the emergence of these videos and the messages they convey, known as slopaganda, suggest to you about what's at play in the separation debate?
Well, you know what? I actually don't know that it really has that big of an impact. And I'll kind of explain why. Yeah, it's troubling to see this, but I think this kind of propaganda is probably preaching to the converted already. Most fair-minded Albertans are going to take a look at one of these videos, if it happens to go in their feed at all, and they're probably going to roll their eyes at it. But this is at its very base level, the kind of content, rage bait inducing content that you'll see on YouTube. And you can see it from the 40 million views. This is one thing and one thing only. It's a money grab. And I think that people realize, you know, as the one speaker put it, you know, they're taking advantage of chaos and manipulation, but it may be not to manipulate the vote one way or the other, is to manipulate advertisers into paying for YouTube views.
Yeah, getting clicks. Now, Carissa, how do you weigh responsibility for who should be reining in online content like this, even spreading the message for Albertans to be wary of these channels?
Yeah, you know, I actually wrote a whole novel on this subject, so I've thought a lot about it. I'm curious to know if there is anyone local from Alberta who's paying for this sort of material to be done. It might not be paid, but I think it might be interesting to see if we could follow some of the money here. I think it absolutely needs to be a multi-pronged response. I'm not sure I agree with Darren that this sort of thing doesn't have an impact on especially youth and young people who are a lot less dialed in. And so I think the multi-pronged approach needs to include, you know, obviously a balance of stricter regulations against fake news and anonymous content that's delivered. I think we need funding for policing these kinds of regulations, because just the regulations are there doesn't mean that we're going to actually see anything coming down. And of course, holding big tech accountable ends up needing money as well. Communication that counters this message, I'd say, would be the fourth prong, right? Something really strong that we're seeing all across that's on YouTube as well. I think it takes a lot of technical expertise and new regulation to combat this sort of thing. And I'm not confident the province's regulations are nearly strong enough, nor am I confident that the RCMP have the kind of digital sophistication to keep up with this kind of proliferated fake news.
Yeah, and the clock is ticking on this one too. All right. Speaking of the clock, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, a generational approach to eliminating smoking and honoring the legacy of a generous Calgarian. More from our Primetime This Week panel in a moment. Welcome back. Lawmakers in the United Kingdom are looking to create that country's first smoke-free generation.
It is, in fact, the biggest public health intervention in a generation, and I can assure all noble lords it will save lives.
A new UK bill has been passed that will introduce a lifetime ban on buying cigarettes for anyone born after 2008. The aim? Prevent youth from developing nicotine addictions.
It's a step in the right direction, and we're really encouraged to see this, hoping that officials in Canada will take note and see what can be done here within our borders to address smoking.
Smoking is the leading cause of preventable death, illness, and disability in our country. The latest data shows 12% of Canadians aged 15 and older currently smoke cigarettes, 10% between 20 and 24 vape.
There's not many things, if anything, that smoking is not going to drastically make worse, which is why I often say smoking is the most harmful thing that you can do for your health. Quitting is the best thing you can do for your health.
The federal government has been asked to consider a very similar proposal before, but has yet to make any moves. Carissa, there have long been efforts to address the harms of smoking, limit access to things like cigarettes and vaping. But where do you land on the need for even more stringent policies?
I mean, in a country where healthcare costs are shared by all of us, I think health concerns that are shown to have a real impact on our health systems are worthy of a strong awareness campaigns. But bans, I mean, I'm not sure prohibition has ever been shown to work. Just makes certain people a lot of money on the black market. So I prefer a sin tax model, which we already have, where there are other levers to discourage access to these things, and the money that's raised goes back into our health system.
Darren, how do you see a law like this going over in Canada, or in Alberta for that matter?
Well, Alberta, the land of personal freedoms, I don't think it would go over too well. Quebec, neither. And Carissa makes a really great point. Prohibition didn't work back in the 1900s. The sin taxes probably have a better way of working. But, I'm thinking maybe more of a Machiavellian way to her point about the healthcare costs. Canada's universal health coverage, maybe we should tie that to the suspected cause of illness. If you have a smoking or vaping related illness as determined by the doctors, then you pay out of pocket for your health care. I think it's simple as that. When a smoker gets a $50,000 bill for their health care, they might think twice about lighting up next time.
Well, that's quite the point. All right. One more topic, and that's putting a face to long-running generosity shared anonymously with customers at a Calgary coffee shop.
Often paid for an entire day's service. When his grandchildren were born or for his birthday, he would take care of the whole day.
He being Norm Johnson, a longtime Calgary businessman and regular at the coffee shop, who for more than 25 years quietly paid for coffee and treats. Johnson passed away 2 weeks ago at the age of 76, and those who knew him say his generosity was shaped by his own struggles with bipolar disorder and a deep belief in human connection.
He didn't judge the way you looked. If you were the intimidating looking person in the corner that no one was talking to, that was Norm's guy. He just found value in every human out there.
Those values are now being recognized with more than $160,000 in donations in Norm's memory to the University of Calgary's Mental Health Initiative for Stress and Trauma, a program that began when Norm's son Trevor lost a close friend to suicide.
Make people more aware of how to identify symptoms of stress and depression and mood changes in themselves.
Norm's legacy also lives on through his signature order, affectionately known as the Hot Norm. There it is, Vietnamese coffee and 3 butter tarts. Darren, what's to be said about such quiet, anonymous generosity going unnoticed by those he helped over the span of more than a quarter century?
Well, how often do you have people in today's world who want to do something kind and generous and, want to step into the limelight and ensure that everybody knows how amazing they are? They post a selfie to social media with some inspirational AI-generated message. But this is the epitome of selflessness from Mr. Johnson. Doing something for others in the true spirit of giving, not recognition. It's a fading trait in the world, and it's, in a world that's wrapped up in self-congratulations and the need for instant validation.
Carissa, last 30 seconds to you. If there is a lesson to be learned from the actions of one Norm Johnson, what would it be?
It's such a great story to end with. I think in the existential crisis, perhaps that is our times, the truth is that we live really locally. And this is just a reminder to seek out all the beauty in the people around us and ask the question, how can we make this space better?
Well said, both of you. All right, we have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Hope you have an awesome weekend.
Nice.
You too, Michael. Thank you.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News about a new website launched by the Smith government ahead of the anticipated October 19th referendum. Goran writes, "Elbows up, Alberta. Canada strong." But Maple Mega wonders how much the website will cost. Regardless of cost, Zach says he's looking forward to voting in the referendum. Doug and Sharon tell us Canada is one of the most respected and stable countries in the world. Stop the chaos and talk of separation. And Andy writes, Smith needs to separate herself from Alberta. Remember, you can always have a say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. That is our program for tonight. Have a great evening and a great weekend, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.